Welcome, everyone, to my May 12th, 2026 webinar on transforming guilt, shame, self-loathing, and self-sabotage. Um, I've been working on this diligently for some time, and I think it was only yesterday it sort of dawned on me that it's kind of a heavy topic, so I don't really want to dwell too much on what those feelings feel like, because when we do the work that I do, it's not about reliving them. It's not about going deeply into those feelings. It's just about being present with them. And so, yeah, we want to keep it light tonight. Guilt, shame, self loathing, and self sabotage are dark emotions, um, and they make us very uncomfortable. In fact, we usually keep them hidden. We don't show them. We don't let them shine through in their glory. And we spend a lot of our psychic energy keeping them down, keeping them away, keeping them from our awareness so that we don't have to suffer with them. However, even when they're out of our awareness, they influence our emotions, our thinking, our behavior. People notice things. They may not notice that we are feeling guilty or ashamed, but they notice that we're feeling something. We're not really fully there. Um, and, we may not have full energy. We may not be very creative, that sense that you're not so present, you're not really there. Um, so they live on without our being aware of them and even of their effects most of the time, though others may need them. So what we're going to do in this webinar is to go on what I called a little search and rescue mission. I like that phrase. We're going to try to find those emotions that are keeping us from feeling our full potential, but in a way that is comfortable, that is entirely comfortable. But we're going to try to find the ones that are limiting our ability to live, to love, to create according to our nature. Now, if I were a psychologist, and I am not, we would be looking for defense mechanisms, ways that we, to use one of their words, psychologists' words, repress our uncomfortable emotions. In my work, we use presence, our transcendental, immovable self, the witness to our experience. We use that self to find and relate to these emotions. All right, what are these emotions? Let's start with guilt. Guilt is said to be a moral emotion. When a person believes or realizes, whether accurately or not, doesn't matter, but they believe that they have compromised their own standards of conduct or have violated universal moral codes, moral standards, and bear and take responsibility for that violation. The key word here is responsibility. We feel we didn't do something, and now we feel that we did or didn't do something. And now we feel responsible for that. And we feel bad. Feeling guilty is frankly unpleasant. Um, and it can prompt good responses, positive responses, pro social effort, trying to make up for what we did wrong, promise that we'll never do it again, try to make amends with people or situations. Um, and that may or may not help our feeling of, I screwed up. I did badly. I violated my own codes, my own standards of behavior. People can suffer all their lives from a feeling of guilt, which they may have internalized when they weren't living up to parental expectations. We all know about parental guilt trips. I think probably we've heard of that. It's famous in various ethnic cultures. I had a Jewish mother who relied heavily on guilt and shame. Shaming, we'll get to shame in a minute. Um, I had teachers in school, particularly in the grade school, the lower school years, who relied heavily on guilt and shame. Um, the shaming being a public thing where you felt that you were being judged by others, and particularly by your teacher, um, and you felt guilty for what it was you'd done because that was really bad. And so you internalize that and it becomes part of your moral code. I won't do that anymore. Um, and, you know, some people have quite a package of moral guidelines. I think I probably did. Other people, not so much. You know, they kind of just do whatever they feel an impulse to do, and can be, you know, real troublemakers. The thing about guilt is you can't argue it away. You know you did it. You know you did something you, quote, shouldn't have done, something you come to believe you should not do. So these feelings often start very early in life. Um, and some psychologists think that's why the feelings are so intense. And we often don't know these things. After all, they do serve a purpose, you know, of keeping us in line and making us socially acceptable. So, you know, be able to have a good good social interactions with people. So they do have a value, but we internalize that. And some people, you know, prejudge themselves. You know, it's like, oh, I better be really careful. I'm going to, you know, make a mistake. Okay, let's move on to shame. Ugh, I wish we didn't. Shame is an unpleasant, it's called a self-conscious emotion associated with negative self-evaluation in relation to social norms. In other words, in relation to other people. But it means that we feel badly for how we acted in terms of our moral standards, but it's what we've internalized from our environment. Um, you know, I think probably before I was being raised as a child, I was raised at a time of transition, but before I was being raised as a child, that's a long time ago. Um, you know, the philosophy of child raising was spare the rod and spoil the child. Children were taught fairly harshly what the social norms were. And so combinations of guilt for violating them and shame, uh, the judgment of others, made us feel pretty badly and kept us in line. Some of us. Others learned to just take it and, you know, go and do whatever they wanted. Um, but we can develop a lot of self-criticism uh, around these things. And when we're feeling guilty and ashamed, then self-criticism is very likely to be a part of our emotional pattern, and cause us even further distress. Um, we can feel really profoundly alienated from family, alienated from community, alienated from country and the world. And we can become very self-deprecating, have a great deal of what some people call inner anguish, and develop what I call self-loathing. That's the term I like to use. Psychologists don't really like that term, but I'm not a psychologist. Um, there can be physiological symptoms of shame, including blushing, um, perspiration, dizziness, or nausea. You can feel physically weak, paralyzed, numb, may have a loss of muscle tone. Some people kind of slump, children particularly. We all know the image of a shamed child, you know. But it can make it difficult to think, to act, to talk, to interact with others. It can be really devastating. Um, and then secondary behaviors may evolve so that people don't look good. They don't look present. They don't look enthusiastic. They don't look like they're committed to whatever it is they're doing. Um, Guilt and shame, they're very closely related but have key differences. It says in my notes that should not be overlooked. Um, Shame is a result of violation of social values, whereas guilt is conjured up internally when one's personal morals, one's personal standards are violated. To put it a little bit differently, the primary difference between shame and guilt is the source that creates the emotion. Shame arises from a real or imagined negative perception coming from others. And again, these things can be built up when we're children so that we automatically assume that others are judging us, even if nobody really notices what we've done. Um, Guilt, on the other hand, guilt arises from a negative perception of one's own thoughts or actions. We've violated standards and we feel badly about having done that. We're feeling guilty for the actions, things we did or perhaps didn't do that we think we should have. The experience of shame is directly about oneself, whereas guilt is a painful feeling of regret and responsibility for actions. Shame is a painful feeling about oneself. And shame can almost be described, it says, by looking at yourself unfavorably through the eyes of others, even if nobody's looking at you. It's a sense, it's the belief, it's the internalized process that says others think I'm a bad person for doing whatever I did or thinking whatever I thought. So I said that out of this can come self loathing. That's our third domain here. Um, the psychologists tend to call it self hatred, uh, or people with low self esteem. But I like the term self loathing because it seems like there's a part of us inside. I find this a lot in people that doesn't like some other part of us. Think about that for a second. There's a part of us inside it that is critical, indeed, really doesn't like some other part of us. And that self loathing can be dominant. Now, when we say self there, we're talking about the ego, we're talking about the small self, right? The self that takes responsibility, it feels things. The witnessing self is transcendental. It just sees things, it sees what's happening, sees what's feeling. And so this concept of saying, well, this part feels this, some other part feels differently. That's normal, shall we say. Um, okay, how do we identify? Oh, I didn't talk about self-sabotage, which I have very little to say about. Um, in psychology, self-sabotage is defined as behavior that undermines one's own existing or potential achievements. It's the thing that it's the part of you, if you will. It's a good way to look at it. It's part of you that keeps you from being able to bring things to completion. There's a saboteur in there. It's one of the archetypes, if you are familiar with Carolyn Mace's work, MYSS, Carolyn Mace. One of her archetypes is the saboteur. The part, and if it's strong, it can basically make life very difficult by never allowing us to really fulfill our goals. We go to work on something and we can't get there. Maybe we can't even get to work on it. We call it writer's block. There's a saboteur in there. But if we pay attention to it, which we will do in the group clearing session here in just a few minutes, if we pay attention to that, we can give that saboteur a chance to realize that we're perfectly capable. Things aren't going to turn out so badly. And then the energy of that dissipates, and the saboteur no longer has a powerful effect. It may still be there to a degree, a small degree, hopefully. Hopefully we can get it down to that. Okay, identifying our emotions: guilt, shame, self-loathing, and sabotage. One way to do that is to look at what we avoid in conversations and situations, to find places to see them, places where we stop ourselves from taking risks, what we feel are risks. I'm really good at that. I'm very good at keeping myself from taking risks. Um, I know people. I have members of my family, not to name names, uh, or even relationships, who take risks. Um, I'll name one name. My youngest granddaughter is very bold, and she does things climbing on stuff that scare the daylights out of me. Because I'm thinking, what if? What if she slips, and takes a fall? She really gets seriously hurt. She has no fear. She doesn't consider the possibility of falling, and therefore she never does. And I learned this lesson when I was a young new father, 2-year old. Um, I came out of the family farmhouse, not my farmhouse, grandparents' farmhouse, and was walking across the lawn, and I hear a voice says, "Daddy, Daddy," and I look around and I don't see her. "Daddy," so I yell, "Where are you?" "I'm up here." And so I had to turn around, and there she was on the second story, having crawled up a ladder. She was on the ladder at a window. Somebody had been doing window painting the window frames, and left the ladder there, and she had crawled all the way to the top. She was up there at the window. And I inside kind of gasped. Um, but I quickly realized she wasn't even slightly afraid. She rather was enjoying the experience of being way up high. It's a tall ladder. And so I got myself together in an instant, and I said something about how exciting it must be to be up so high. And she gave some indication that she enjoyed being up there. And I said, "Can you get down okay?" And she said, "Yes." She's only a couple of years old. And so I decided my best strategy was to walk away. So I walked on across the yard and then went and hid behind a big tree and peeked. And sure enough, when she was ready, a minute or two later, she, step over step, came down the ladder, no problem at all. She had no problem, one, because she had enough coordination and strength, and two, because she wasn't the least bit afraid. It never occurred to her she might fall. Yeah, she was careful, so she knew the potential to fall, but she wasn't afraid that she was going to fall. There was no tightening up inside. She was perfectly relaxed, and she climbed down. So I think that differentiates that feeling good self-esteem, good confidence, and never. And what it basically means is not having a feeling of fear or being like me. Oh my God. So there's that inner voice that we get that says, "I can't do this. I'm afraid to attempt this," or "they won't like this. I'll be judged, ostracized." You know about us being ostracized, right? It's an old camp joke. summer camp joke. You know, it's like let's ostracize what one guy says to a group of other guys. Let's ostracize this kid, this other kid. Says, "I'll hold him and you do it." And of course, the kid doesn't know what it means, right? Um, so that inner voice, that's a great way to recognize that the, the negative feelings, guilt, shame, self-loathing, self-sabotage. What can't I do? Where am I blocked? Where am I stopped from being myself, from taking risks, being creative, from getting my work done? Where are those blocks? So we're going to use that in the group clearing session here in just a minute. Um, Now, I explained before, we can relate to these uncomfortable emotions as parts of ourselves, something within us. When we do that, we create some space between that transcendental self being present as a witness to the experience and the different things that are going on inside us. Now, we can use a whole variety of techniques, and I thought I'd just spend a minute on them. I don't usually formally do it out loud with people. I often do it inside, silently, um, as I'm communicating with their parts. Um, but we can relate to these uncomfortable emotions as parts of ourselves, relating by accepting reality, loving what is, as Byron Katie was a woman, by the way, not a man. Byron Katie was a woman. Loving what is, and she had a technique called the work, um, which I've rarely used, but it's actually pretty effective. It's pretty good. So you can do the work, as it's called, um, to help you accept reality and take responsibility. Take responsibility for what's happening and what you're doing. We can be relating with empathy using nonviolent communication. Uh, and Ho'oponopono. I didn't put that in there to get the empathy in there. Got to put that in there. And I'm not going to explain Ho'oponopono right now, but if you're curious, you can check with me or just look it up. Uh, we can be relating with benevolent intention by using emotional freedom technique. That's the tapping, or you can tap the fingers. You don't have to tap all the fingers. You grab the wrist; it does the same thing. But you can use emotional freedom technique. Even though I really screwed up and it caused a great deal of unhappiness in others, I'm a good person. I try real hard, and I'm going to keep trying. Bravo. That's a power word. Um, so you can use that emotional freedom technique. Uh, we can relate by being present with them using inner relationship focusing, which is the technique I most strongly prefer, um, which is sensing into what is there. And we're going to do that in the group clearing session. Sensing into what is there and creating a relationship between ourself, what Dan Weiser Cornell calls self in presence, and whatever is going on inside us, which may be multiple things. Um, I didn't write out a sentence, and I should have done it because now I can't think of one. But I've heard people in one sentence have 4 or 5 different parts, different points of view on an issue express themselves, each of them fighting to be the dominant voice. And my role is to hear that, to hear each of those parts and help people sort them out and give presence, be with each of those parts so that they can feel heard, feel accepted, take an internal breath and let the energy dissipate. And one doesn't really have to do anything. You just be present with them. It's beautiful work. And there's no pain involved. There's no judgment involved. There's no accusations involved. We don't indict or prosecute anybody. It's beautiful work. And the last thing we can do is the subtle energy work that I do, which is mainly, not entirely, but mainly matrix energetics, master energy dynamics, which is finding all the specific things and shifting the energies. And I have a lot of techniques for shifting energies. So that's a very important part of my work, of course. Uh, and if I have a gift at all, it's that I can tune in to the different emotions that are inside of people, like guilt and shame and self-loathing, and be there with those parts and shift the energy around there. So sometimes it's just directly energy work. Sometimes I use um, interrelationship focusing kind of technique, and usually silently, not in doing it with people, but just doing it silently. Um, oh, there's Ho'oponopono. Guilt and shame may also be responsive to Ho'oponopono, but we use them as bringing empathy, and you know, self-hatred can be responsive to Ho'oponopono too. It's a beautiful technique, very simple, um, and it's basically an energy. It's not. It's it's a mental technique, but it's basically using the energy. Okay, with that, um, I think we're ready to go to work. So I'll pause here, see if there's anything anybody wants to comment or question um, about this experience. In the group clearing session, we will try to locate one or more of our feelings of guilt, shame, self-loathing, self-sabotage, and we will work with that and help it to find its home, its natural state. So no pressure here, but anybody want to comment? Now's the time to do it. Anyway, I hope all this discussion is helpful in getting us to see, oh, um, I have trouble doing something. And, you know, that's something I, you know, would like to work on. And we'll go work on it here in the group clearing session. All right, not seeing anybody. Um, we'll end the recording.